Hello everybody, it's your boy Jmulls, and today we have a really interesting hot take that I want to dive into. It concerns the new play experience and the nature of leveling in Final Fantasy XIV, and just how much there is to do. I think this is a very interesting topic of conversation, so let's get right on into this, shall we?
Do not squander it.
So the hot take today is courtesy of @Bossy, who says, "This might be very spicy or mild depending on who you ask, but I think Final Fantasy XIV needs to change the leveling experience badly. We're quickly closing in on 14's 6th expansion, and that ceiling of new players catching up becomes ever higher, especially with how long it can take leveling up from 1 to 100 through the MSQ. It can be very intimidating for new players, especially with how easy it can be to level up and access new content in, like, say, WoW and the Old Republic. At the same time, leveling up your old jobs also becomes a slog with how rare XP is outside of roulette, instant zones like Basja, and the weekly challenge log. This is a problem the game has been facing to some degree that I've been talking about, and I think will only become worse as time goes on because there's no real good solution to this. I think a massive part of the appeal of Final Fantasy XIV is its story, but MMO players, whether you like it or not, will almost always go the path of least resistance. And if you force people to do the MSQ, one, it forces them to do various dungeons and trials over the course of their leveling journey, which teaches them the way that Final Fantasy XIV telegraphs mechanics, how it does mechanics, and how you actually play the game. It's not going to get you the ultimate rating by itself or anything like that, but if you're at all paying attention, it will do a good enough job introducing various elements of the game to you. On top of that, it makes you care about the world of Eorzea and Hydaelyn overall, because, yeah, the story is that good, going from A Realm Reborn to Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker, Dawntrail 7.2 and .3. Not everyone is going to vibe with the story, but the story does a great job of getting people to actually care about the world, and again, introducing them into Final Fantasy XIV. But with each of these expansions basically being a 100-hour JRPG to get through, that is a tall ask, especially if you're trying to convince somebody to join the game to play it. Like what happened with the Monster Hunter collab. I had people go, so how long would it take me to get to a point where I can play the Monster Hunter fight? And I'm like, well, so you're gonna have to basically do a 300 to 500, maybe honestly 600-hour JRPG first, and that's a tall ask. That is a very tall ask. Even if all of those hours are good quality content, it's just so much and people only have so many hours in the day. But it's one of those situations where, like, the more I think about it, I don't see a good solution around this other than just restarting the game and making a new MMO. Because let's assume you make a kind of what World of Warcraft is doing with the War Within, where after that story is over with, you make essentially a recap mode where it takes you through the important plot beats, the important cutscenes, and just condenses the overall story down to a far smaller chunk of time. You can probably call a few quests in Final Fantasy XIV, but my god, I cannot imagine doing that for Final Fantasy XIV's like Hydaelyn and Zodiac arc without significantly compromising the pacing and the world building in certain characters. I just can't see it happening. For A Realm Reborn, sure, you can probably call quite a bit of that still, but one of the biggest things I disagree with a lot of people on when I see people's opinions about like modern stories is how like so many people want everything to be like plot beat. I'm like, you lose out so much characterization and world building if you're only focused on this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. You have to make me care about those events happening by making me care about the world and the characters, and I think Final Fantasy XIV's main story does an excellent job of doing that. It's an MMORPG, so one story flows into the other, so over time, and like cut forward 15 years later, and all of a sudden you have like 15 years worth of story to get through. It's just so much. Like I said, there's no real good way around this entire problem. And I think the moment you provide a in-game skip, or an in-game recap, or an in-game summation that is free, that is just readily available out the gate for new players, so many people will just elect to not do it. They just won't do the main story, and yeah, that is their prerogative, that is their choice to make that, right? Absolutely. But the problem is, MMO players are MMO players. People will always go, at least 99.9% of the time it feels like, go the path of least resistance. You can argue, oh, I'm not like that. Cool, you're in the vast minority. And I don't see any recap or summation experience doing an adequate job of introducing and expanding on the world sufficiently to make people care about future stories that are told in this world, without essentially treating it like it's a reboot and at that point just make a different game. Because if you have to reboot the story essentially, then everyone who's been along for the ride up to this point in time will have to go through baby's first journey through Final Fantasy XIV, which I don't think many of us want to do because we've been playing this game for many years. There's no real good solution here, because the moment you pull the trigger and you no longer make the MSQ mandatory, so many people will just never do it, or they won't get around to it. And then we can argue about ways to incentivize people to do the MSQ, and then we're just kind of back to this point in time. Final Fantasy XIV isn't like World of Warcraft where they can just kind of go, hey, let's just focus on this new narrative arc we're doing, because a lot of previous expansions in WoW, quite honestly, had bad storytelling, and story wasn't the main focus of the game. It is in Final Fantasy XIV. They are fundamentally different gameplay experiences, and FF14 has always been primarily focused on its story and storytelling. WoW hasn't been. And even then, we're seeing issues form for new players in World of Warcraft that have been there for a while, by the way, with that game doing a subpar job of actually introducing people into the game. And now they're trying to rectify that. But for me, the only real bad part of Final Fantasy XIV's new play experience is just simply how long it takes to get through the MSQ, and that A Realm Reborn isn't as good as most of the other expansions. In the grand scheme of things, that isn't too bad. But can we imagine how bad this problem's gonna be in, like, say, another 5 years, or like in another couple of expansions? At some point, they'll probably have to get a bit elegant with a solution here, but I am increasingly becoming of the opinion that the best thing Final Fantasy XIV can probably do on this issue is simply nothing at all. Maybe continue to touch up on A Realm Reborn, sure, but it's a Final Fantasy game, and it's an MMORPG. I don't think it should necessarily shy away from being a Final Fantasy game, nor do I think it should shy away from and try to, like, relegate its story to just be optional up to this point in time, and to have us, like, start anew. If we're going to just do a new MMORPG, which I don't think we're doing anytime soon, okay, that's one thing. But if they're going to do what I imagine they're going to do and keep Final Fantasy XIV rolling, I think the better play is to just take the One Piece approach. Yeah, it's a long experience, but it's also a quality experience. Have faith and have confidence in that, and move from there. Like, maybe you could reconfigure the way leveling is done, so that people can get to max level before finishing out any of the expansions, but like, you get through a chunk of the story and you get to max level, but if you want to experience the new story, you still have to do the rest of the MSQ, maybe on an alt, but allow people to then go, oh hey, I can do endgame content right now, and then throw a bunch of incentives behind continuing to do the MSQ, like, hey, you can get some really fast leveling for your alt jobs here if you continue to do the MSQ. Maybe we throw in a bunch of different mounts, pets, glamour stats, stuff like that behind the MSQ even more than they already are, but keeping that story there is probably the best outcome, because I just don't see any other solution being better than the current situation. I absolutely agree though, leveling alt jobs in this game right now is boring as sin. They need to do something with that. I've been saying for a while, this is something they need to address. It makes me glad that I leveled up pretty much all my jobs a couple expansions ago, because I just simply could not be asked leveling a job from like 1 all the way up to where we're at right now. I just couldn't be bothered.
Do not squander it.
It's kind of the problem any long-running MMORPG runs into, where there's just simply too much. It's like WoW has run into this problem, where the last time it did a complete reset of the new player experience was with this new island thing, and it just really undermined the initial allure of World of Warcraft, where it would introduce you to your race, your class, and then slowly build up from there as you go from zone to zone. It's a problem that WoW is still trying to address, where it doesn't really do a good enough job of introducing new players into the world and making them care about these things that longtime players truly love and appreciate about World of Warcraft. It's an understandable problem, because asking people to go from like Kata leveling into TBC leveling, Wrath leveling, Kata leveling, MOP leveling, WoD leveling, Legion leveling, BFA leveling, etc., that's just simply too much to ask. And it's like, WoW has tried a few solutions over the years, and I think it kind of shows the issues a lot of these solutions would also have for Final Fantasy XIV. One of the solutions options WoW had was just, okay, well, let's have everyone play a little bit of the expansion before getting enough XP to move on to the next one. Well, the problem was, you'd only dip your toe in a couple of zones, and then you'd be already out of that bracket going on to the next expansion. You wouldn't have a throughput narrative to truly care about. You'd be introduced to, like, the beginnings of each expansion constantly without any real development or closure. You'd just be a fish out of water. And then WoW tried, okay, let's do this new island thing, where instead of the traditional leveling journey, where you start out depending upon what, race you pick, we'll have all new players do this island. Well, it was written terribly, focused on characters and elements that aren't important or major after that point in time at all, and then it used to throw you into Battle for Azeroth, where you would just not know any of the characters, motivations, or anything going on, or, nowadays, it throws you into Dragonflight, where, yeah, same problem, you don't care about any of the dragons or any of the things that are going on, nor do you care about Alliance or Horde, or your race, or your class, really. It doesn't do a good enough job that the old game did when it was still fresh and new, of introducing people into this world. And now WoW has to try to reinvent the wheel again, because this current system it has is not sustainable. So what they're trying to do now in the next expansion, well, technically like a patch before, but still, they're redoing the island. They have characters that are important to the story overall, like Thrall and Jaina. They're having people do the entire Dragonflight expansion, which is kind of like the initial story experience for this new big narrative arc they're trying to do. So they're actually going to have people do that entire storyline, while also doing like story mode fights for the big raid fights as well, so people can actually experience the story there. Then after they finish Dragonflight, they're going to move into the War Within, which is the current expansion, and also part 1 of the World Soul Saga, which is their trilogy of expansions telling a new story. Think of Dragonflight like the prequel, the War Within is like part 1. And instead of doing the entirety of the War Within, they have made a new experience, which is essentially the Spark Notes version of the War Within, where they get people through the important bits, the important cutscenes, including in the patches, and then people will move into the new expansion that is upcoming Midnight. It is still not an ideal solution because it's not as good of an introductory experience, even in terms of premise, as back in the day with classic World of Warcraft or Cata World of Warcraft, because for that game, getting people to care about the race they're playing as, the class they're playing as, the faction they're playing as, that was so important to that game and to the immersion element of that game. That's just not really there anymore, nearly to the degree that it used to be. And now bringing it back to Final Fantasy XIV here, the story is so important because it gets you to care about the world, the characters. As I said before, it gets you to do various fights because of how Final Fantasy XIV constructs its overall narrative, that while some people will say FF14 doesn't do a good enough job of introducing people into how to play the game, it does get people to do dungeons, to do trials, to do these big fights, to learn how FF14 telegraphs mechanics, as we talked about, and also how to play the game by actually playing it. It's not going to turn people into an ultimate raid or anything like that, as we've covered, but in my opinion, it still does a decent enough job of doing this. And if you remove that entire element, you now have to start from scratch. Okay, we have to do a new player experience. This is all dev time, by the way. We have to do a new player experience that not only introduces the world to people, that took for everyone else 15 years, for these people we'll just like bash it out quickly. We also have to teach them how to play the game, how we telegraph mechanics. All in a hyper shortened experience. I just don't see it as feasible, and I don't see them doing anything like that in a way that would be a good enough of a substitute for just playing the regular game. So like, while doing all the expansions is long, without just making a new game, I don't see a better path forward for Final Fantasy XIV. I just don't see it. Like, imagine if Dawntrail was your first experience with the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. You would think of them as nothing burger characters, you wouldn't care about them like at all. And yeah, that's partly the problem with like Dawntrail's writing, but also, like, that effect would still like be there. You wouldn't have any of this reservoir of characterization that we have all experienced over the years for these characters. That just wouldn't be there for new people. So like, unless the story essentially does a reset to where it's like all new characters in an entirely new location that doesn't ever really call back to any of the places we've gone to up to this point in time, it's like, if you do that, then like maybe you can get away with it, sure, but with the little tidbits we have for where the story is going to go from here, I don't see that happening. I just don't. Maybe they could figure out a way to do it, but I think as we saw back in Shadowbringers Shardringers, with that giant surge of players, there will be a lot of people that will be willing to do it, so long as the game is good enough and the hype for the game is there. And for the people that really do not care about the main story, you can always just get a boost. Like, that is there, that is an option. I think it's important not to offer it baseline because, again, path of least resistance type stuff. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic of conversation.
Do not squander it.
But here's where you come in. I would love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives on this. If you were in the director's chair, how would you solve this problem? Or do you even see it as a problem to begin with? Would you go for a full reboot? Would you just go for a new game? Would you go for a new play experience? What would you do? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, and your perspectives. And also, while you're down there, leave your hottest, spiciest take about patch 7.35 for Final Fantasy XIV. I would love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and I may react to your hot takes in a future video. So while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Bye bye, everybody. Until we meet again.